So in the last set of tutorials, we created a space game. We made 3 folders for it: models, scenes, and scripts. So I'm within that same space game project, but what I did is I created a new folder called space game, and I dragged all 3 of them, all 3 of the project files back in there. And then within the assets folder, I right clicked and I went to create folder, and I created another folder called shoot game. Now what we're going to do within this shoot game is we're going to revisit everything that we learned before. And the reason why I like to do this is when I was first learning to program myself, one of the things some of my friends who worked in the game industry as coders, and they still do, is they suggested that once I learned a feature, I should take what I learned and create several little projects based on those small things. And as I expand on that knowledge, add new elements to it. Okay? So I'm pretty much going to redo what I did last time, but I'm going to build a different kind of game. So now I have a folder called shoot game, and then within that folder I created a folder called scripts. Now scripts is empty, so let's go ahead and go to create C# script, and I'm just going to name this shooter, and I'm going to attach this shooter script to my main camera. Now if you select your main camera, you'll see that there's nothing exposed here, no variables, no anything. And that's because we haven't created anything. So let's go ahead and double click this shooter script. And let's create some variables. So above the start function, or method when it comes to C#, we're just going to create 3 variables. One is going to actually store, so public rigid body, and I'm just going to call it bullet. Put a semicolon and hit Control S. Now this is just going to store our bullet prefab that has a rigid body attached to it. So let's select our camera and make sure that worked, and in a second you'll see that popped up. So we have bullet rigid body here. Alright. And I'm not exactly sure why it registered these other variables because they're not here yet. But let's go ahead and type them out. These are a couple of the other variables I wanted to include. So I was going to do public float. Now remember, a float is just an integer with a decimal point. So 1.0, 2.0, 3.4 are all floats. So public float, and this is just going to be the power in which our bullet moves. And I'm going to make that equal to 1500 for now. It's just a predefined number from when I did this, worked on this tutorial before. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to control the speed in which my camera moves. Because our camera is actually going to be our shooter. So we're just going to go public float, and I'm going to just do move speed, and I'm going to make that equal to 2.0 f. Now you have to put the f, it just signifies that the number is a float. Alright, I'm going to hit Control S, and you can see here I'm not exactly sure why it updated it from the last one. It could be a glitch, but let's remove this component, expand this, let's remove this component and reattach it. Let's see if that, let's save this. Okay, there we go, now it works. What the issue was my name of my file was different than that of the C# file. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is in void update is we want to create 2 variables, and these 2 variables are going to store the amount of speed that our character will move, or our camera for this case, horizontally and vertically. Alright, so I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to say this is going to be a local variable. These are public or global. So we're going to make a float called h, and that's just going to stand for horizontal. And we're going to say it equals input dot get axis, and get axis is a method that's predefined, and we're going to say horizontal. So what this is going to control is when I press the left arrow key or the letter A, it's going to store the amount of pressure from 0 to 1, so, or -1 to 1, controlling the amount of pressure into the h variable. So if I just tap it lightly and say it puts off a number that says 0.05, or I'm sorry, 0.003 or whatever, the amount of pressure. It'll actually store that into this variable. So that's all this is doing. And so just as a refresher, if we go to Game Object or Edit, Project Settings, Input, and we look for the word horizontal, you can see that this is a predefined property. And you can see that it's actually mapped to like a joystick and all this other stuff. And the same thing with vertical. You can see vertical is a predefined property. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to copy this entire line of code, and I'm just going to do V, and I'm going to change this to vertical. So again, all this is storing, my H and my V, is the amount of key press to my left and right arrow key. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and move this. Right now, this isn't actually moving our objects. All we did is we created two more variables, and it's storing the amount of pressure being pushed by this axis on the horizontal. So to make our object move, we have to type transform dot translate. And if you remember, we did this before on our spaceship. Now translate has three properties. How do I know this? If I select my main camera, transform is here. Translation just means the position it's in. And here's the 1, 2, 3 properties, X, Y, and Z. So X, if we select here, is our X-axis. This is our horizontal. So let me go ahead and create a cube and place it right in front of our camera. So if I want to translate it with my arrow keys on X, it's going to move back and forth. My Y is my up and down. Alright, so if we look at this in code, all I have to do is hit 0, 0, 0, and right now it's not going to move at all. But what I can do is I can say H, which is storing the amount of pressure that is being pressed. So think about this. If I press my left arrow key or my right arrow key, it's going to store it in H. And this line of code here moves our object. So by pressing H, it'll move it left and right. And by pressing V, it's recording that response. So let's go ahead and hit Control S. Let's jump back in here and press play. And let's test this out. Now I'm pressing left and right, and I'm pressing up and down. You can see that's pretty cool. So it's actually moving around. Now mine are actually moving in inverse. So let's take a look at how we can actually control that move speed a little better within our inspector. So first, we have a move speed that we created earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this by hitting Control C, and I'm going to multiply it by my axis here. So let me copy that again and paste it. So now we actually have in our inspector another way of controlling move speed. So that's 2. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S and press play. And you can see it moves a little bit quicker. If I slow this down, move speed, or I make this a negative value, so let's try to make this -1 and see what happens. You can see now it runs, or it moves according to the way I want it to. Now, there's a big issue in programming when it comes to speed. If your computer is faster than mine, it'll actually calculate this according to frame rate. And that's how this works. So if you're getting 60 frames per second on a video game because you have the best video card or whatever, and I'm getting 30 frames because I have an old beat up computer, it's going to be a problem. So the way we normalize all of our speeds for our characters and our animation movements is by multiplying it again by time dot delta time. Oops, not capture frame rate, by delta time. Now what this says is, let's go ahead and space this out a little bit better so you guys can see that. What this is doing is it's saying, okay, I want to calculate this by the clock of the computer, not by frame rate. Now you still, if you have an older computer, it's still going to kind of lag a little bit, but this is going to actually normalize it so it looks the same on most computers. And this is great if you're building a networking game. So I'm going to go ahead and press play here, and I'm going to move it, and you can see that it moves a lot smoother, which is really nice. I'm going to return this value. I'm going to actually make this a -5. Press play. You can see that runs a lot better. Now, mind you, we're moving our camera around. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and go inside of this shoot game tutorial. I'm just going to name it shoot game for my scene. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at furthering this game.